Hey, Kelly. Welcome on the System2 podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Well, why don't we get started by just getting to know you a little bit more? What's your story?
Oh, my spiel?
Yeah.
Great. I like to say that I'm a recovering investment banker. I moved to New York City about 20 years ago now. Prior to that, I'd worked at a professional football team. I worked at corporate finance or Johnson and Johnson. Prior to that, grew up in a teeny tiny town in Pennsylvania with not much going on. And didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, but I knew I wanted to like make money. So, really was like, how does one make money? Like study the finance. So found myself in finance for particularly that reason, not exactly like soul driven, but I got there eventually.
What town in Pennsylvania did you?
York, Pennsylvania. Do you know it?
No. I did spend some time in Wilkes-Barre for a while. Yeah.
Not so far away, but Pennsylvania's it's so big. No one really knows where York is, but it's actually like close to Baltimore, home of the peppermint patty.
Nice.
Kind of our
Okay.
claim to fame.
So how did you know at that young age that you wanted to? I don't, you wanted more. You wanted to make more money. What was it that inspired you?
Yeah, well, I had, a pretty tumultuous upbringing. I had, a parent who struggled with drug addiction and was incarcerated most of my life, another parent who had some like mental health issues and was like passed around really like there was just this central theme of like survivorship, and I could see earlier on that financial independence was the key to unlocking that feeling of safety. I would go on to learn later that it's not everything, but certainly when you don't have means and you don't have ways of, paying for your education or supporting yourself, I saw this in themes from my family that desperation led to pretty bad choices. So I was very keen early on, like fortunately had a pretty good head on my shoulders like throughout all of it and saw that like education and working hard was my ticket out. So I was always the girl who had like 17 jobs and side hustles, and I was like delivering papers and low key selling weed, right? Just like any hustle I could get my hands on while still trying to keep my grades up and like being class president. I just like always had that sense of I wanted to have that foundation for myself. I wanted to have autonomy over my future and over my finances. But you growing up in a small town, you don't really see the range of possibilities. It's so funny, like, live in New York, raising my kids here, and they see just every career opportunity right in front of their eyes. They see in their peers' parents and, the people that are around them. I didn't necessarily have that, but I knew I wanted to break into a world where I could see more possibilities. So that was in hyper focus for me at a really young age.
Did you have any role models that you remember that were exemplifying this?
Yeah, I had a few. I had an aunt that was a huge part of my life. It was like, a mother figure to me. And she just had that sense of, I actually had really strong women around me. I had a cousin who was 10 years older who was really strong. And my grandmother was an entrepreneur, and she had a beauty salon and, at an era when women did not own their own businesses, kept track that she was an investor and, nothing particularly outlandish, but like taught me about dollar cost averaging before. Like, I don't think she could say what dollar cost averaging was, but taught me like the premise of it and how compounding interest worked and how like time was your biggest asset. She's an incredible she's still alive, she's 95, she's still kicking, she's a riot. She's tearing it up at her retirement community right now. She was incredibly important to me as showing what, like a strong, independent woman could do on her own. Her husband left her for the secretary, and she had
Classic.
3 kids that she raised on her own, and she just buttoned down and invested well and, lived a modest life, but it was on her terms. It was really inspiring to me. She also gave me my skincare routine, which I really thank her for.
What's the skincare routine?
You don't even wanna know. It's like 50 steps. It's aggressive. Now that I'm, like, investing in consumer, like, really immersed in it, but at the time, it was me and my grandmother at the Clinique counter with, like, that one yellow lotion that everybody bought, and she taught me the importance of you have to have a lip on before you go out, and you have to have your moisturizer on, and, like, you can take on the world. It stuck with me.
I mean, it's your grandma sounds like an awesome woman. I was just thinking it'd be kind of cool to have someone like that on the podcast as well. The completely different generation and what entrepreneurship would have was like for her and like all the struggles that she dealt with. That would be so. Yeah, if you're up for it, put us in touch. I think that would be pretty great.
That would be amazing. She is my kids call her a savage because she takes no prisoners. She's a savage is a polite word for how would you describe her demeanor, but she's just like given less and less Fs like with every passing decade, and now she's just says exactly what's on her mind. I still admire her to this day.
Wow. And what about going back to your parents? It sounded like they were not ideal parents, but what did you learn from them? Like things to do, things not to do. Like what was the impact that they ultimately had on your life as well?
Yeah. It's still unfolding, so I'll keep you posted. But, I think with my each passing decade, I think, when you're younger and inherently narcissistic, like you're supposed to be when you're a kid, right? The world is meant to revolve around you. I definitely felt a little lost at sea watching my parents struggle, and of course took it very personally. And as I was a teenager, quite angsty and had that chip on my shoulder, like, "I'm gonna get out of here, I'm gonna show them, make a name for myself," and that it definitely drove me. As I got older and as I've had my own children and, struggled through the trials and tribulations of what it is to try to, like, make tiny people into good humans, I really have a new respect for them just as people that were going through their own struggles, and I was not the main character there. And I have a profound sense of like sadness and empathy for their own plight. I think, I care deeply about rehabilitating people like post incarceration. I saw, like my father messed up early on and could really just never get back on track. After being in prison, you come out and you try to find a job, and background checks kind of like get in your way. And then you just go back to what you know. And at the time, I judged him quite harshly for what looked to me just like continuously messing up. And now I see as, also a failure of our system to support people, trying to have second chances. So that cause as a grown up was really important to me. And, my mother had me at 18, like was a kid herself. I had my first kid at 28 and I felt like a child. I felt like a baby and was like, what am I doing here? And then thinking about her being so young, trying to be a parent, trying to figure out what her life was about. I think ultimately what they've given me is like a profound sense of empathy that everybody's fighting their own battles, and I do think they did the best they could. And ultimately, I think it made me a pretty strong and empathetic individual. So I'm really like grateful actually. But it took me like many, many years to be able to say that and so much therapy.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's an interesting question, right? Because sometimes it's because of these challenges that you end up becoming who you are, and you end up being inspired of living a different life and wanting more for yourself. Had you not had that childhood, things may have been very different from you, despite how difficult that child may have been.
I always say if like my parents would have loved me like a little bit more, I would have been such like a worse and less successful person. So I really, really do have like a sense of gratitude for it because it felt so black and white to me that I really wanted to change my circumstance. There was no sense of wanting to stay put. I really wanted to like blow it up and do something major. But it's funny how it emerges now. Like so much of what I do is kind of championing the underdog in a way. And I don't think, whatever success looks like to you or to me, I think for me, I will always identify as the underdog, right? I always have that chip on my shoulder for better or for worse that really drives me. And I feel so passionate about like democratization and supporting people whose like starting line is just a little bit behind. And it's really given my life like a profound sense of meaning, which is, a lot different from working in muni bonds, a couple years out of college.
I do want to get to the muties as well, but the
Oh.
no, it's an interesting, very interesting point. Like my story is you. Like when I was born in Romania, I came to the U.S. as a kid. And my family was very poor when we came here, and I'm now not poor. And looking at my kids, how they're growing up versus how I grew up, worlds apart. And It's a funny point. Like I was even before we hit record, and we are talking about parenting and like parenting advice, and I feel like a lot of people in our generation are they're just genuinely like interested in being good parents, and that's part of the thing you're trying to read up on and talk to other people about. And I asked I asked that question to some guy that I met, and he's like, the best thing a dad can do if you want to raise successful kids is to abandon them. Like, look throughout history of all the great people that have become great, and it's despite the fact that they, had a shitty dad, not because their dad was so nice to them, right? So, I mean, there is something to that, right? If you want to raise like resilient kids, like sometimes I'm not advocating that you should do that, but it's, it does end up sometimes, yeah, like producing interesting kids with character.
I think about this all the time. I wonder if you do too, like how to reconcile their childhood to mine. Because there's times I look at them and I literally can't relate to their experience. They're like growing up in this like giant city. Like we were saying, they're like, my big one's just like hopping on the R train to go meet his boys for sushi. I'm like, I didn't like that was so far away from my childhood. And I think about like how sometimes I want to like kick a little dirt on their face. Right? Like, sometimes I want them to have it a little bit harder, and I think I can be hard on them sometimes because I'm like, where is the source of friction that they have to overcome in order to build character?
Yeah, yeah. No, I read a book recently called The Comfort Crisis that talks about this, and it's like we live in a world where you don't need to do anything. And this is kind of going to be interesting to talk about what you're currently doing in terms of investing. But you can now make a ton of money if you make people's lives easier. But our lives are already so easy. Like, God forbid we go to the movies because we now rather stay at home and watch Netflix. We're not don't want to go to a restaurant and you're gonna like DoorDash something to your house. But there was something about that struggle, right? About like the act of doing hard things that ultimately makes you a better person. So I almost feel like there should be companies out there that will purposely make your life harder, and people should pay for that because it's ultimately going to be good and healthy for you.
Do we just find our next startup?
I think so.
They're just like kick dirt in people's face.
Exactly. That give
I
us all your money, we'll make your life hard.
Wait, I think we were talking about I was talking about this recently with regards to the dating apps and this like crisis that I don't know like, a lot of my peers are having in terms of it's just too easy to go back to a pool of like fresh potential suitors when anything gets hard with the current partner, right? And like I'm like maybe life isn't supposed to be this easy. It's like too much and then we make up things to be stressed about because our body needs a sense of stress. So we're going to focus it on like anxiety and whatever social media feeds us that day to be anxious about.
Yeah. Well, so are you saying that the dating app, you're saying that it's because people know that there's an easy option that they're gonna not want to deal with the hard parts of relationships because it's like it's easier to just quit and then go find somebody else than to try to work through a hard issue?
I mean, I have a lot of beef with dating apps. I'm not even anti-dating app. I just think it's such an interesting like new social like injection that is like fairly new to the generation. We like haven't really seen how the data is like playing out on it's like we're starting to see, right? Like how difficult it is to actually find like real connection. But yeah, it feels like, it's so dopaminergic to get on an app and like do some swipes and get some external validation that is like inherently soothing when you maybe don't feel great in a partnership because you messed up or so you feel criticized, and it just feels easier to like, well, I can just go back to this like fresh dopamine source and get that sense of like soothing and a fresh start and just repeat cycle, especially in a city, New York, where it's so densely populated and there's just like beautiful women everywhere and there's like successful men everywhere and you can just like use that. And then we end up putting each other in these like matrices that can easily show up on a screen, right? And you can almost like craft this avatar version of yourself in order to like seek and be sought. I don't know. It's a rabbit hole for sure. And there's a fund out there that's actually like investing in the loneliness epidemic. And I find it to be so fascinating. And it's like kind of driven by like what's happening in technology and people and how we're like intrinsically seeking connection, but also kind of don't know how to do it anymore.
Yeah. Wait, so is this fun, like, I guess, pro or against the loneliness epidemic? Are they into dating apps or against dating apps?
They are investing in technology to solve the loneliness crisis. So again, like not anti-app or anti-dating app, but there are interesting ways to, maneuver the algorithm such that you're rewarding different behavior instead of like multiple matches, for example. And I don't know if like Match owns many of the dating apps, and the business model thus far has been to, make the apps quite addicting so people stay on them and not exactly like find their next mate. But wouldn't it be interesting if there was some other sort of incentivization to stay partner? Maybe you have like credits that you can use towards like dinners the more you are with the same person, right? There's like interesting ways to tweak an algorithm or partnerships. Like you still have to think about the commerce of it if you're a business builder, but while still integrating this human portion of it. There's another company I saw recently that just raised some capital, and their model is a dating app, but it's like largely driven by like deep AI, deep dive into a personality and kind of like, extracting from you what like you truly value and believe, and then matching you with someone, but they only give you 3 matches. That's part of the deal. It's a very expensive onboarding fee. LTV, you don't have to keep coming back. The long-term value of the customer is you can come one time. I think it's a $6,000 upfront fee, and they give you 3 matches. And their success rate, the last I checked, was like 80% of those 3 matches were in long-term, which I think they were classifying as over 6 months.
Wow. I wonder what do you think makes that work? Is it the AI like the matching algorithm is really good, or do you think the fact that you just like you have 3 and you paid all this money, like make it work, and that thing just ends up being very effective?
That's such a good question. I don't know. I think it's hard to extract that data, isn't it? Because it's so deeply personal. But I think the algorithm is good. And I also asked, like, well, what do you like? How do you filter? Like, what are the things that you have to, or like, what do you prioritize in terms of matchmaking? And they did say that the first, like, you have to start with physical appearance. Like, you have to do that. So you have to kind of get the physical type. And then they said the key is actually getting the participant to be really honest about how they answer the prompts. And that's actually the trickiest part. I think people like say they want one thing, but it's actually not what they're like inherently drawn to. So part of that algorithmic process is getting one to be really introspective about what their like true values are, and whether they want someone to be values aligned or actually like values opposed, as opposed to just like saying the things that they are and then going and filtering for the things that other people are.
Hmm.
Does that make sense? Like, I
It
guess
does.
deeply emotional, maybe you don't want someone that's deeply emotional. Maybe you actually know that you feel better with someone who's like a little more steady and even. But that's
Yeah, how
proprietary bit of the startup, right? Is like understanding the prompts, right? It's not, it's the data is one key component, but it's like, how do you prompt people to be honest with themselves and then thus being honest with others?
yeah. No, I think that it's such a great point. Beyond it's applicable beyond relationships. It's just figuring out who you are, what you really want, what fucked you up, what are the things you're ultimately trying to solve for with work or money or whatever else you're doing in life. And ultimately what I've also seen is just this once you realize you can start asking these questions, that on its own is enough to get the process started. You then become much more reflective on yourself, where you're trying to go. Why am I trying to do these things? What is it ultimately that I'm after? And to your point, it's trying to be like brutally honest with yourself about those kinds of questions. And yeah, and then ultimately, 60 years later, you might have some answers to these things, but it's not. Yeah, it is not an easy process.
Maybe that's the fun of it. Maybe that's the bit that's supposed to be hard. There's a book called, everyone heard this book called Wellness by Nathan Lane.
I don't think so.
It's a great book, but in it, there's this premise of this one of the characters asking like 20 questions of a partner. And after the end of the 20 questions, you were supposed to know whether the person was your partner or not. But the premise was actually just the asking of the questions that actually made you bonded, right? It's like the exploration itself, which is the bonding bit.
Yeah, that's super interesting. It's yeah, the product. Who'd have thought? Just talking to people actually creates like social bonds and caring about other. Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, and like it's interesting too, like the process, or going back to comfort and everything is super easy, but sometimes like doing something difficult together is extremely important. I have a couple of friends who are Navy SEALs, and they talk about their whole like the famous, like the training that they all go through in selection, and going through that suck together is like that's one of the main purpose. I guess you're supposed to like weed out the people that don't really want to be there, but it's also about having that shared experience with someone that is hard, but then you overcame it and you did it together. That then forms this bond between people. And I think it's similar, like in dating or anything else, right? Where you're just like, if it's handed to you, it's like I didn't have to hunt for this. Like, what's the point? I can go find somebody else. But if you actually tried and you worked at it, and then not even like the initial process, but then afterwards in a relationship, you're working with somebody over a long period of time, going through that suck together, that's like, okay, and we're building something here, and there's more connection that way than if it's like, oh yeah, this was just handed to me by some algorithm and I can always find another option.
It's just I think we don't value what's easy. It's like, well, sometimes, like, I'll put events together and I'll put a ticket price on it just so people value it, right? Like, it's cut the cost is covered. I have a sponsor for it. But if I don't charge for it, then people won't think it's valuable. And so it's interesting. I think there's something in our nature that doesn't value what we don't have to, like, work for or pay for or feel like we've earned in some way.
Yeah. Speaking of which, yeah, tell us about how you end up working investment banking when figure out that money's your ticket out, and how that experience came about.
Yeah, I was working at, for a corporate finance job at the time, Johnson& and Johnson, and a friend of mine basically called me up and said there was a spot open at his department at Merrill Lynch, and could I come in and do, 16 interviews in a row? So I did what any, 20-something-year-old do is I, like, popped an Adderall and took a train to New York and I just, like, grinded through it, and I honestly was, like, didn't even really know investment banking was. I didn't like, now living in New York, kids, like, come up through the ranks, like, knowing they're gonna go into banking or consulting, and that will be their jump off into whatever. I had no idea. I was like, "Investment bankers do what?" And, like, my family was like, "You're gonna be a bank teller? What?" Like, had just no clue, but, had intrinsic finance. All you have to know to be an analyst in an investment bank is, like, how to be an Excel ninja, or at least back then. I guess now, like, is taking the analyst job. Rogo is the company that's taking all the analyst jobs, just so you know. But at the time is like you're good at Excel, then you could be a good analyst. And if you could like eat shit on a daily basis, then that's what you did. So I did it. I did it for a few years
What
until I
was that like when you went from, the smaller town to the big New York City with the giant trading rooms, the big investment banking floors? Like, what was that? What was that like?
crazy. So crazy. The cultural difference. I did have a starter city between. I went to college in Philadelphia. I worked for the Philadelphia Eagles for a little bit after college. I worked for Johnson& and Johnson, where I was kind of rotating around, like, the Northeast and different operating companies. So I had, like, that starter city, um, buffer where I went from being super small, rural, most people were white, not a lot of diversity, to, like, living in North Philly for 5 years, which was its own kind of culture shock. But I remember, like, my second day on campus, I was mugged. I, like, went for a run and I, like, was mugged. Afterwards, it was like, "I'm alive!" Like, I just for some reason, just being in this urban environment was like it just, like, woke me up, and I felt
What? Sorry, what were you carrying? Like, if you're going for a run, like, what is there to mug? Like your
there was
cell
I had
phone?
very little. You know what they took from me? My iPod. My iPod. Remember?
Yeah,
Yeah, like, it wasn't even a shuffle. It was, like, the big it was, this is
yeah.
2001. I had my big iPod with my corded headphones and, like and they got that and, like, my student ID, and it was literally day 2 of living in North Philly, and when I learned, like, "Oh, we don't run at night," and, like, instantly I was like, "Okay, this is where we get street smart." Like, I knew even then, I was like, "Okay, this is where I get street cred." Like, I was assigning meaning to, like, every era of my life.
What were you doing for the Eagles?
I like to joke that I was defensive line coordinator, but I was really just in finance.
Okay, nice.
My go-to line is to make up some ridiculous, like, position.
Love it.
Yeah. It was so fun. Yeah, the CFO came and spoke at my college, and I'd grown up as an Eagles fan and just kinda went and stalked him, and I was like, "I think you need to hire me as a co-op, and, like, here's my resume, whatever," and he brought me in, and I stayed for a year. It was really, really interesting working for a sports franchise. It's like that operates kinda like a small business, and, you get some funding from the NFL, and it's also highly political, and especially in a town like Philadelphia where sports is everything. So we saw a little bit about how the organization worked. Also, like, not a ton of advancement opportunities for young women, as you can imagine. But if you're a football fan, it was like a really fun job for a year. And then afterwards, I was like, I gotta get a big girl job.
Say more about the process of getting that job. How did you get all these jobs?
Great question. Which job? The Eagles, Johnson.
I guess in general, like how did you work your way up from given your background to getting all these like very great jobs? Like not even just for someone out of college, but these are jobs, great jobs for anybody. So how did you find your way into those
Yeah.
corporations?
I think one of my superpowers, I don't have many, but I'm not even that good at finance given that it's all I've, like, done in my whole life. But what I'm really, really, really good at is getting to know people and trying to figure out how I can add value. And I think it's like I tell this to my founders all the time who are, like, fundraising, going in with the ask is not how you wanna open a conversation ever, and being in a room and trying to understand how you can add value to the people you're with, and then building, like, real relationships, and that's been honestly, no one's ever asked me that question before, but I think that has been the thing that's unlocked every single door is building relationships, not just like, asking for favors and getting lucky, but trying to add value in the rooms that I'm in. Figuring out pain points and seeing if I can be helpful and then like getting opportunities that way. It's like a high level answer, but that's what happened at the Eagles. Johnson and Johnson was more of like a, recruiting thing that, standard, like, looking for Temple grads, and they had a program, and that was, like, kind of by the book. Working for Merrill, same thing, like, build a relationship with I knew I wanted to move to New York. I went there, twice in college. I'd never been to New York, and one of my girlfriends was like, "Oh, come, I'm gonna take the train." My auntie lives in Soho, and I remember we took the train and, like, coming out of Penn Station, it was, like, such a Holly Golightly moment, and I was like, "What the fuck is this place?" And, like, someone was, like, peeing on the corner, and David Blaine was in a bubble. Do you remember that?
I do, yeah. Like,
But I was like, what is going on?" It was just, like, so full of life, and the energy was, like, so contagious, and her auntie lived in this, like, gorgeous Soho loft, and she made skirts and was, like, a painter, and she had, like, 6 careers at once, and I just never saw anything like it, like, the range of possibility was so huge, and I was like, "I wanna be here." I just knew if I could get here, everything else would open up. I just had, like, this sense of it. So at the time, I was dating someone whose friend worked on the sales and trading floor at Merrill, and I was like, I had a conversation with him, and I was like, "If there's anything that ever opens up where you think I could come in as an analyst or associate, whatever, I'll do anything. I'll, like, work at ops. I just, like, have to get here." Like, 3 weeks later, he called me. He's like, "You're never gonna believe this, but someone just got fired, and I think you would be a good fit." He's like, "You gotta be a guy's girl, though." And I was like, "Done. I'm good at that."
that's wow. So how was that? You were talking about even that point about being a guy's girl and being in a culture like that, whether it's an NFL team or the investment bank. What was that like for a woman?
I mean, crazy, and it was just like a game you learn to play, right? It's like a little bit of I don't know, life is a game generally. You just have to, like, figure out the rules and figure out which ones you're willing to break and at what cost. But I've always been in male-dominated cultures, and it's a balance, right? There's something to be said about being a guy's girl, but still being a girl's girl at the same time, and I very much identify it's in my Instagram bio. It's like my first line is a girl's girl, and Because truly, 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 everything I do, everything I do, everything I do is for women. It all reverts back to women. I come from a long line of powerful women where the guys were like just noticeably absent. And I feel like the power of women has been ignored for a really long time. And so I kind of think of myself as like an intermediary. Like I want to learn how the system works and I want to like give the rules to the girls while still kind of doing it in our own way and in our own framework, whether that's, dating, investing, wealth building, how we create our family structures. Like I just think that there's a better way, and it's definitely not anti-man, but it's like it lives somewhere in like allyship and understanding that we do kind of operate differently as genders, and it like helps to just acknowledge that. I think when we like kind of combine all of the superpowers that we have, like that's when companies work better, that's when families work better, that's when relationships work better. It's just kind of like acknowledging those differences, and then like instead of using it against each other, using it as like creating these like amazing, powerful, diversified like groups and running with it. So, I mean, that's an elegant answer, but like also a lot of sexual harassment along the way. And like honestly, like I'm all for like the backlash and like the dismantling of the patriarchy, but I also think like you got to keep it moving too, right? Like I think you can't let this shit get you down. It's like be strong, have boundaries, and like keep it moving.
At what point did you realize that you wanted to you said you've always been like a girl's girl, but you were in this like man's world for a while. At what point did you decide to do something else about it and to leave that world and to try to like act on these things that have been, to your point, like been running your family for generations?
Yeah. To answer honestly, it's like all happened accidentally. And it's like one of those things when you get farther in your life and your career, you can look backwards and write the narrative, but you can't. I wasn't writing it as I went. But now I see how everything kind of culminated. And that's what happens when you've got like different careers and different like life spells. Working at the Eagles, I definitely felt that sense of being like, I couldn't look around and see a lot of like women at the top, right? You saw them kind of like supporting from the underneath that you couldn't see at the top. Johnson Johnson is actually like a really, really diverse environment and like almost cozy in a way, almost too cozy. It was like a lovely work-life balance, and like they had like a credo on the wall of like ethics, but it also didn't have that like edge, hustle, and move that I like really craved. And then so I went to banking, which that had that edge. But again, I couldn't look above me and see women that I admired. There were women I admired, but there wasn't women that I wanted to emulate their life, if that makes sense. So what I saw looking up was men who were crushing it. And nearly 100% of the men who were crushing it had women at home that were supporting the rest of their life. So we're kind of acting as COO of their life, and then they were the producers. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that model. I just didn't want to emulate it. And then when I looked at the women, if they were crushing it, they chose to not have children. Again, completely fine with that choice, but I ended up having children. So then I felt like that avenue wasn't available to me. And then I saw like the occasional woman who like had kids and were working and they were dying, just getting absolutely crushed because they were expected to perform in the same way as the men who had like the support at home. And so I just was like, I just kind of felt confused about it. Like that the culture wasn't really built to do both, but yet we're like being jammed this narrative of like, you can have it all and you can do it all. And it's like, I think it's like the wound inflicted on my generation specifically, right? It's like we're like past the traditional wife generation. And like a little bit before girl boss, where and they're like, no, you can do it all. You should be working, and you should be a mom, and you should get married, and you should do all these things, and then you're just kind of like dying in the process. I left Meryl when I got pregnant and I was already burnt out. I got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. I had like a major health crisis. Realized I just was like kind of slowly like killing myself. I kind of loved it at the same time. I weirdly felt like addicted to that like culture of winning, but it wasn't suiting my body. And then, I had two kids. My older child is on the autism spectrum, ADHD, like just a tough case. And then my younger child was born 3 months premature. I was like hospitalized throughout the pregnancy. I just had like a tough intro to motherhood and was completely out of the game. So I went from like hustle, grind, hustle, grind, hustle, grind, hustle, grind to like now I'm at home with my babies. And that was like the craziest gear shift of my entire life because now like the reward system was completely inverted where everything up until that point, like hustling and grinding and moving and doing was the thing that made you good at the thing you were doing. And then you're a parent, and particularly young children, like, the thing that they need is for you to kind of be still and present and attuned and open. And I had no idea how to do that. And it was like, it was the hardest adjustment I ever had. And that's when everything kind of felt like I really had to take a look at my own value system and what was driving me and like how my nervous system was wired. And just I had been so hyper vigilant and like fight or flight for like 20 years. And it started like to come crashing down in the stillness of having kids.
That is fascinating. Kids like stability. They like the quiet, and it is not right. I never thought about it that way. From a bunch of us, like we're wired very differently. It's all about like let's do a ton more things, but the kids would rather just have an easy day where everything's predictable, same as yesterday.
Spend an hour putting magnet tiles like on top of each other. And like that's what my son would want to do, just sit there and play with magnet tiles. And I was losing it. I was losing it and then feeling guilty about losing it. And also just realizing I never developed that sense of like safety and staying still. It's still something I work on, right? Like just being able to chill and not feeling like I'm losing productivity hours or I should be cooking, I should be cleaning, I should be like catching up. The to-do list is never ending, right? Or I should be like working on the newsletter, whatever. There's always something to be done. So I think parenthood came as like a real shock. And I really kind of forced myself to particularly because they really needed me given their particular cases. I really forced myself to stay home and do that. I just had a feeling, given my own parental upbringing, that I needed to learn how to be a mother, if that makes sense. I didn't have the mothering instinct. It wasn't, it took me a long time to admit it. It just wasn't this thing that was intrinsic in me, maybe because I wasn't actively like mothered in that way. I didn't have the blueprint for it. I didn't have grannies and aunties around me when I had my children to kind of show me the way. I'm in New York. I'm by myself. I hired a baby nurse for a week and fired her because I thought she was mad at me for not being motherly enough, and I couldn't stand the judgment. But yeah, I was just like alone in it. It was like super depressed and realized like, I think it's time to like pull in some, first time I started therapy, first time I started to like, really kind of look at my own value system, like what kind of person I wanted to be.
What resources did you find helpful when you're learning or seeking to learn how to be a mom?
Community first and foremost. Again, like back to being a girl's girl, I think tapping into other moms. So we were at like a similar stage and I could find that sense of village. Like New York can be a pretty isolating place if you don't have that sense of community. We don't have our, families around us here. So first step was finding other moms that made me feel less alone and less crazy. And then secondly, I like had a few different bouts of therapy and different kinds of therapies. Like first, just talk therapy to get me comfortable, like talking about my experience and not being ashamed to vocalize it. And then, I don't know, I think I'm a believer in therapy, but I also think you can kind of max out on certain parts too. I got to a point where like, okay, I'm like kind of tired about talking about my bullshit. Like, how do I actually like change some of these beliefs that I hold, or like why do I still feel anxious all the time? So there's like a couple modalities that like really, really helped me from like a nervous system standpoint, like somatic therapy. I do a kind of therapy now called brain spotting, which is like completely changed the game for me.
What is that?
It is, I will butcher this, and my therapist is gonna hear it and be like, you didn't do it justice. She would never, she's amazing. But it's essentially it's a little bit like EMDR. Am I saying that acronym right? Eye movement descent. Yeah, EMDR, where it uses focal points of your eyes to connect to different emotional experiences that you're having. So how it goes in practice is you can bring up something that's triggered you this week, like, even just, like, a little triggered, like a 4 out of 10, and she'll, like, use a pointer, and you can kind of change your eye positioning, and you'll notice where your eyes, like, connect to, like, the somatic experience of the feeling, and then you can just kinda sit there with it, and it's the fucking worst because she makes you just sit with the feeling of discomfort, and again, it's, like, back to this uncomfortability with, like, just sitting in stillness, particularly when there's, like, a sense of anxiety or discomfort, and you kind of just, like, pay attention to it and, like, watch it change and move, and often what will happen is other things will come up. This is, like, the voodoo part of it, which I don't understand at all, but I've been doing it long enough where I can tell that it works or something happens where a trigger today will usually be associated with a memory, whether from really young or from 10 years ago, but things will almost pop up like it's a string that's like connected to other things that have happened in your life. And you'll realize like how it's tied together. And then you kind of just stick with that feeling. And I don't know, somehow it like kind of clears out and you're like, okay, all right. And you have both a deeper understanding of like why the things are pissing you off or making you feel, small or whatever it is. And then you also have, like, given yourself the space to somatically experience it so it can kind of dissipate, and then you can just move on with your life. You're not so tied to the narrative behind the story. It's almost like just detaching.
Wow, interesting.
It's so fascinating and weird, and it's like the most highly effective version of therapy I've ever done because she makes you shut up, which you can tell, like, I'm not good at shutting up. I can sit here and intellectualize, like, my feeling all day, but, like, actually, like, feeling it is another thing.
Hmm. I'm curious. You talked about the community piece, the village piece of this, and finding other moms. I'm curious to get your thoughts on. I've had a similar, I don't know, like a similar realization. Like for me, finding my tribe is one of the things that has been. I realize it's the thing that probably fucked me up the most, especially leaving a country, moving to another country where I didn't quite feel at home. And it's also the point we were discussing earlier about the loneliness epidemic. Everyone's on devices. You're doing all these things. It's harder for people to actually get together and relate. And I recently got introduced to a couple of like people in the special forces community, and I didn't know anyone in the military like a few years ago, and now I'm like neck deep into this, and it's been really interesting to hear some of their stories and to look at the military as an organization that can take a bunch of strangers and within a short amount of time, turn them into people that are willing to take a bullet for each other, right? And there's something like so primal about that, like knowing that the people next to you are willing to do that. And we still would obviously do that for our kids. But there was a time when we used to do that for our village. And it's not to say that the village was this big paradise. There was still like fighting and jealousy and all that. But when when the enemy was at the gates, when like shit got real, you knew that you can count on the people next to you to have your back. And that I think is, I've talked to some of these guys, and it's like some of the stories. Like I was on a Zoom call with one of them, like met him for the first time, and we're having like this deep conversation. He was going through a bunch of like he had retired. He was going through a bunch of like mental health stuff, and he was saying that he was like was on a Zoom call. He was in his home office, had these like French doors behind him, like sunlight was pouring in, like looked like a beautiful home. And he admitted to me that he is uncomfortable to this day being there because he's afraid that someone's just going to barge in from behind him and attack him. And then we're talking about like how compare that to like when he's deployed in freaking like Afghanistan and you're in an active like war zone getting shot at by people. But when it's your turn to nap and you know your buddy's got watch, you have the best sleep of your life because you know that the other person there is like has got your back. So it's not like where you are and the fact that in one situation you're like actively in danger, another one you're like in a beautiful suburban home. It's more about the people around you. And so I'm curious, like, and that's more from like a more like stereotypical like male perspective, this whole like life and death, whatever, taking bullets for each other. But I'm curious, like how from your perspective, and especially from because we used to have this as a tribe, like we're all together and having this sense of like I don't know, like safety within our peer group that then allows us to then explore and do more whatever, like all sorts of other things on the outside. And I just been like really curious as to like what is it about it and can we reproduce it? Like, what can we change in order to bring this thing back? And again, I think I've had some answers on the guy side of it, but I think it requires like bringing the whole like everybody together to bring back that feeling of community.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I'd be super keen to hear your thoughts on the guy side too. And like admittedly, I think, when I started Golden Hour, like my thesis and my purpose was really hyper focused on like women investing in women. I only wanted to invest in women founders, highly underrepresented in the funding they get. Less than 2% of venture goes to women founders, blah, 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 blah. And I just really wanted to work on that problem. And then as it happens in life, things in work imitate what's going on in your personal life and what's going on in your relationships. And I just like for the past few years just felt this. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like this tension between genders is higher than ever. And it's showing up in the same way as like our like political system, where you almost feel like you've got to choose a side and then be on the opposite extreme as possible. Like either you're a trad wife or you're like a blazing feminist who is like just like anti men. And I feel like we're just like losing the sense of middle, both in our politics and the way we make policies and how we view people with dissenting opinions and like within this gender framework too. And what I've noticed through what I've done in work and like working with women who are investing for the first time maybe and like want access to like education, the thing that moves the needle in my work is community. And so I found that it isn't just like this nice to have, it isn't like a feel good, it's actually the thing that really moves the needle and actually really moves capital, because you can get comfortable with like asking questions in a room full of other people and then hearing their questions and their perspectives. And it's almost like, we were talking about before, like the sum of the parts is greater than the whole because you have all of these different and perspectives coming together. And then that kind of gives you this like nice, well-rounded way to view an investment opportunity, right? Like even like I think about the way I use like ChatGPT right now. I use it as like a bias checker because I'm one person with one perspective that's lived one life. So I see things like very much in my own view, but it's missing. It's missing all the perspective of the collective. So I'm really interested in like getting as many people in a room as possible when we're talking about different opportunities, because it makes me smarter as a person when I have all of these different perspectives coming at me. And I'm thinking about as like the way that's developed, I'm like, what I'm missing or what I had been missing in the earlier parts of this is the perspective of men. Because I was focused on like investing in women and gathering women investors, but then there's only so much you can do with like when you're only hearing the perspective of half the population. And I like, I say this to my male counterparts too. I'm like, you're missing huge opportunities because you're not going to talk to a founder who's developing a period care brand. You're not going to relate to that problem. You're not gonna understand, like, the hormonal health care. You're gonna, like, you can hear a market size, and that can maybe mean something to you, but you're missing a perspective by not having women on your team. It's gonna make you a better investor. It's gonna give you greater access to deal flow. It's gonna give you access to, opportunities that you wouldn't see, in your team of men, and I'm, like, feeling the same way as well, too. Like, I'm missing a male perspective. I just think we've gone so far apart, and like men are this way and women are this way. And I appreciate that there's like this uprising of like men's group and like this move toward vulnerability and some more like feminine skills in man's world. But I also like, I have made a conscious mission, particularly post election, when I felt like we all kind of hit our saturation point of division, that I want to be in a room with male investors. I want my opinion to be taken seriously and I want theirs to be taken seriously. And I want us to hear each other out and I want us to combine our biological differences and our lived perspectives in a way that actually just makes us really fucking smart and open to all kinds of opportunities and possibilities. And like that's when you asked me earlier, like what's the culmination or the narrative or like what did I want to build? Like I don't think I knew until now that I wanted to like be the wedge to division. It sounds like a lofty goal, and maybe just my angle is in finance. Maybe that's the only angle I have. If my wedge division happens to be in my little niche of like consumer venture capital, but it's a place to start, right? Because this is where the innovation happens, is an early stage venture, and I want there to be, like, a lot of different companies built for a lot of different people, built by people that look differently, so we can have, like, a work culture that doesn't just have to be, like, you either kill it and have a partner at home or you don't have a family so you can kill it. Like, I do think we can just build things a little bit differently if we work together that can kind of honor the biology of the fact that women's bodies still have to carry pregnancies. There's no way around it yet. Science is getting there. But we can, like, honor that and still really be connected to our purpose and our passion without feeling this, like, immense pressure of having to do it all. But we need men on our side, and we need to be on their side to be on our side.
What say more about what you're doing now, in terms of the investing, the types of companies that you're supporting, and how this all ties together.
Yeah. Yeah, so the way golden hour started was, like, accidental. I was home with the kids, ready to start working again, had no idea what to do. I knew I couldn't go back to banking, like, my, youngest son almost died, or, like, you see, like, these, like, life or death moments, and you're like, "I can't be running around in a trading floor with my hair on fire, like, pretending like I give a fuck about, like, credit derivatives," you know? Oh, I'm like, "Okay." I started to consult where I was figuring it out, which basically meant, like, I would build business plans and financial decks and, like, strategy for anyone who would pay me just so I can kinda get back into the game, and the kind of people who would pay me were usually early stage founders who were, like, product people or creative people who wanted to have someone with some financial savvy to help, like, set them up on the business side. And through that, again, I saw this crazy disparity between the male founders I were working with and the women founders, and it was the men were easily raising capital for early stage ideas because their network believed in them, right? There was, like, this inherent sense of, I'm going to build this thing, and you tell your buddies, and if your buddies have it, they're going to invest in your idea, and, like, that was like a social norm that existed within, like, male culture, but I didn't see that on the women's side. Women would have a great idea, and they would either pitch their friends' husbands, or they would go through this, like, traditional kind of a cold outreach funnel of, like, LinkedIn and pitching VCs, but it was very cold. It wasn't, like, network first. When I saw that happening over and over again, like, despite the fact that the founders were both competent and capable and metrics were right, but the men were just doing it through their network, I was like, "That's bullshit." Like, we're community oriented as women. Where is our sense of, where's our golf course, right? Where are we sharing deal flow? Why are we, like, sending opportunities to one another? And, wanted to try to build a version of that for women. Started to invest a little bit of my own capital, started to bring some friends in, and, it's a very long story short, but then kind of grew that network of people who cared to invest in early stage founders to now, like, 800 and counting. I would say, like, 90% of those folks are women, not writing huge angel checks, but the beauty of what I do is I can get, like, a nice chunk of allocation in a seed or Series A deal, and then syndicate that out to my network. We host a lot of events, like, with the founder, so the founder can kind of pitch live, a little Shark Tank style, but again, that sense of community where you can hear other people, like, smarter people or people with a different perspective, ask questions. And that makes us all better investors when we're hearing everybody's lens kind of attack the same problem, or, ask different versions of questions. So that's what I've been building for the past 4 years, is this, like, hybrid angel community slash, like, venture model where I'm still sourcing the deal flow like a venture fund would, diligencing like a venture fund would. I like to do it on the back of a VC lead, which is, like, hugely cheating. But again, I told you my skill set is surrounding myself with people that are smarter than me and using my relationships to add value. So that's really, like, again, just another example of how I do that. I hang out with, like, really smart investors and really smart founders. And when I see them building something cool that I think my network would care about, I clamor for an allocation. And my network's amazing. Like, these people are so smart. They all have really varied superpowers. There's attorneys, there's influencers, there's, like, C-suites, there's marketers, there's bankers, they're just, like, incredible community. And, like, you aggregate their power into one syndicate, and they become, a line item on the cap table that, like, way out kicks its coverage in terms of check size. So this idea of like community and like aggregating influence is like another through line of everything I do. And I find it to be really interesting. And then I think like the next chapter for Golden Hour is to make it more like gender inclusive, which is like such a funny thing because you would think my whole deal is gender inclusion. But I realize when I'm like siloed in my own like female founder, female investor, it becomes like an echo chamber, right? Like we all believe the same shit. We actually need no, we need the guys in the room too. And so, I started to invest in like, male founded companies as well, as long as I feel like they're building something that my network cares about. It makes hopefully the world a better place or more beautiful or more healthy, or I don't know. Although I am looking at like a Zen alternative right now. So maybe I'm wrong about that too.
Say more about how you built the network. Who are the first people you reached out to? What are some of the strategies for other people out there looking to build networks or form communities? What works, what doesn't, what's hard? How do you do it?
Yeah. It's a really good question. I feel like someone should teach a class on this. It's not going to be me, but someone should, because every single day, I tell my founders this all the time. I co-run an accelerator with my work wife, Annie Evans, and we like founders all the time. They are like getting ready to kick off their first fundraise. And my first question always like, what's your network like? And I'm like, what? But it's so important. My network is everything. I'm nothing without the people I know. And I'm just so lucky to have smart people around me. I think that how I built that network is first was just by leaning on the people who have worked beside me and believe in me. My first angel check ever was is a company called Within, which is an acupuncture studio here in New York, 5 locations, hopefully coming nationwide soon. They're meant to be the dry bar acupuncture, but invested in her pre-seed, pre-revenue, pre-product, pre-studio, because we were in the trenches together as investment bankers, which is like basically like being in service with someone, right? But we had that like bonded experience where we were in the trenches working 100-hour weeks together and like seamless at 3 a.m. to survive, and like going to the Banana Republic to buy a fresh shirt because we didn't get a chance to go home. But I didn't care what she was building. I was going to invest in her because I knew I worked beside her. I knew her work ethic. I knew how smart she was. I knew I would bet on anything she was building. So that was my first check. And I think about that all the time because it's like what this industry is really. It's like investing in founders and their vision. And so if you don't have a product to show, like how do you represent yourself? So I don't know. I always tell people like start with your closest people, right? If you're trying to build a network, if you're fundraising, go to the people who've worked beside you, the boss that you knew you like knocked their socks off and be like, this is what I'm building. Do you want to be a part of it? If not, do you have like 2 people you would recommend I meet? And then that person gives you the vouch, and then your network is like 2 wider. And then there's an exponential effect that happens to that. Events for me have been a game changer, both hosting them and attending them. But I don't know, hosting events is like, it can be a slog sometimes, but like you make your mark on the world. And what people appreciate when you like intentionally have a gathering. So like whatever your niche is or whatever, if you have like something interesting to talk about, like throw a couple experts on a panel and like have a couple cocktails to serve, and all of a sudden you're like an industry expert, right? There's like it's like brand building, and it doesn't have to be that complicated.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, what are some of your strategies around events? I think you just mentioned doing them is the most important part. Like, don't go overboard. I don't know, have you done crazier events? Do you try to make them more memorable, or do you try to? Is it just a numbers game? You try to get them in as often as possible to bring people together. What's your thinking there?
Yeah, it depends on the style of event. So I do investor events a lot, meaning there's a founder that I got an allocation in their round, and I want my investor network to meet them. And so in those cases, it's hyper intentional, right? So I'll invite our entire investor network. We'll do them in LA, New York, Miami. We'll do a little road show. And we generally try to have, it depends on the brand, right? I was raising for a sexual wellness company, and we did like a sexual wellness workshop that included the founder's pitch, but also they were adding value in terms of like information of your like sexual archetype, and everybody got to leave home with like toys and goodies, which they were like thrilled about. also gets them like deeply connected to the brand. So even if they're not an investor, maybe they'll be a consumer and like, hey, we just decreased your CAC, right? Your customer acquisition. So I like to try to add value as well as just like, sell. We did a round for Brightland in their Series A, which is a California olive oil company. We did this like gorgeous lunch in Beverly Hills where we had like the olive oil integrated into all of the ingredients, and the founder both like talked us through like the provenance and like how to use the product, and then kind of like brought us back into the story of the business and like her brand and what she was trying to build. And so like the storytelling aspect of fundraising, I'm like really fond of like making that a part of it, as well as like the investment ask. So a lot of intention behind investor events, building brand into story, and hoping that people come away feeling like connected to the brand in some way, even if they, don't care to invest in it. We do events for our founders too, where we try to add some value beyond networking. Again, like the first thought is like, how can I add value? Like, the last thing I wanna do is, like, put something on someone's calendar where they show up, you get a stupid name tag, very anti-name tag, which is controversial, but I really like to go around the room and make everyone do, like, a 30-second intro, like, hate it or love it, because always, always, always what happens is, like, someone will say, like, "Oh, I'm so and so, and I'm founder of da da da," and someone's like, "Oh my god, I've been wanting to meet that person," and they'll, like, beeline. So I want everyone to know who everyone is in the room, but I hate a stupid name tag. I don't know why. I just feel like it ruins a look and it, like, makes it feel corporate, and I'm not into it. What other event hacks do I have? Something memorable. We do, like, business tarot sometimes for our founders just because it gives you, like, some novel item that just you leave feeling like, "Oh, that was different than everything."
What's that? Well, yeah, what's business tarot?
We'll have, like, a tarot card reader that's, like, specifically focused on, like, business and foundership, or, like, business astrology. We love to have, like, a little bit of woo. I don't know, anything novel, right? People just want some dopamine in their life. Like, life gets monotonous and boring. Like, ideally, if you're gonna come to one of my events, I hope that you leave even if you're talking shit about it, like, "Can you believe they had tarot cards? That was stupid. That woman did it." Like, you're gonna remember it, and you remember me, and then maybe you'll come to the next one.
I love it. What about okay, so tell me more about some of the portfolio companies you've invested in. You've already mentioned a couple. Mention a couple more. How do you think about the types of companies you're going after? What are some of the trends you're seeing right now? What are you excited by?
Yeah, I'm excited by so much, actually. It's such a fun time to be a builder. So I would say generally broad thesis is companies that are changing the world for the better in some way. That's really broad, like make a case for me. And also because I'm getting allocation on behalf of my network, it feels matchmakery in a way. So I'm like also trying to keep a pulse on what my investor network cares about, and then kind of sourcing deals um, that make sense for them. So, Une Femme, we have Jen Pelka in common, was, an early investment of mine, and she's building sparkling wine here in the United States, which is a big deal. Most of it's not sourced here domestically in California. She's also just has such an incredible palate, such an eye for food and hospitality. Not that many women-founded sparkling wine companies here in the US. Just a killer founder, like a great example of like investing in founder. I think I came in at Series A for them, so they already had like a little bit under their belt, but that was like, and they got on Delta after that, and I've just been like crushing ever since, and she's amazing.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. To your point about women winemakers, she was telling a story on the podcast about how Veuve Clicquot was actually like means like widow Clicquot, and it's the widow of the family that had this innovation. Basically, I forget exactly what it was called, but the main point was that it created the champagne was clear as opposed to being murky, and that process by making it clear ended up just completely revolutionizing the product and making it much more appealing to people. So it was, yeah, a little bit of, it's in the name too, her contribution to that empire.
How cool is that? Yeah, these like brand stories, I go crazy for them.
And it really is interesting too, because like you assume that for a lot of stuff, it's just like the taste, but there is something aesthetic about these products, and you get the aesthetics right, and it completely just changes the entire category. And now champagne, everyone thinks of champagne as that clear liquid, not like a murky whatever it was beforehand.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm also like so intrigued by the number of industries where like women are the main consumer, but not the makers, right?
I
I
mean,
mean,
that was that.
in consumer venture, like 80% of consumer spend is controlled by women, but yet less than 2%. of venture goes to female-founded companies. It's really
No,
interesting.
it's nuts. I mean, yeah, we're talking a little bit beforehand, but yeah, my wife started Rain Concierge, just a jewelry company, and like the biggest unlock is making women like making jewelry for women and making it okay for the women to buy jewelry for themselves. It's like a no-brainer, you know? It's something like our kids are gonna look back on and it's like, wait, that was the main innovation? We're like, yeah. It turns out that you just had to like make it for them and make the women the target, like the main buyers, and all of a sudden you've built yourself a nice business on the back of that. But it's like, yeah, instead of waiting for the guys to give jewelry as a gift, it's like go directly to the women. There's so much that changes when you have that like mindset from the beginning, including the product innovation, the types of things are coming out, the way that you're communicating that value prop to the customers. But no, I think I couldn't agree more. It's such a yeah, it's one of those things where you look like back in the day, like when doctors recommending cigarettes to pregnant women, and you're like, what the fuck were they thinking? I think it's gonna be something similar. Looking at to your point about the entire consumer market, it's like why, yeah, this is done completely like backwards. We should have a lot more like women representation in these brands that are like being purchased by women.
Yeah. It makes no sense at all, but I think you're right. I think it's changing in real time. Yeah. But Unfem's a great example of that.
Well, yeah. What are some other things that your network is interested in at the moment? I think that's a phenomenal angle to, especially because you said you have around what like 800 people in the network. That's like it's a great like sample size for a survey. You know, so this is yeah, you're getting some great intel.
Yeah, yeah, and, like, most of them are accredited investors too, so it's, like, just the purchasing power in this network is bonkers. Um, the one we just did, like, closing today, I hope, like, the wire is clearing as we speak, is really interesting. I'm so excited about it. It's called 831 Stories, and it's a media company. I have a book here. This is one of their first ones called Big Fan. But I met these founders a little while ago. I invested in them pre-seed. I do this sometimes. I invest early as Kelley Arena pre-seed, and then I kind of get to know them and, try to be helpful as I can as an angel. And then when they get to a place where I feel comfortable coming in as golden hour, then we'll spin up a syndicate like C plus to A. But these founders are so kick-ass and they're huge romantic fiction fans. And then as they were digging into the market size, they also happen to be exited founders. They built a brand called Of a Kind, which they sold to Bed Bath & Beyond. And then they had a podcast together and they wrote a book together. And both big romantic fiction fans and realized that one, the romantic fiction consumer drives like 60 to 70% of all book sales. So it's like massively driving the book sale market. Also, there's no branded content. There's no brand around this like rabid fan base. And this fan base is obsessed with the genre. They read a book a week. They will pay extra for a Where Are They Now? They're like desperate to know, like to dig in deeper. It's like, and then also all of the movie studios want to have like this pre-vetted content that already has this fan base because the studios are now trying to like de-risk as far as content creation goes as well. So they're looking to the literary market to kind of drive like what's going to be turned into movies, but there's been no brand that's kind of like capitalized on the romantic fiction market, which is an $80 billion market. So these founders are building exactly that. It's called 831 Stories, and they have both books, and then from the books, like the end of every book, there is like an epilogue and a QR. So then the reader QRs, they go to their website, and now they have data, right, on all the readers, and they have a direct relationship with the readers of the books. They have an app where you can dig deeper into like characters and you can interact directly with the authors. Essentially, what they're trying to do is build the Marvel universe for romantic fiction. So they have partnership revenue for like, hey, set your next book on our island, because that we've seen like the Italy effect via White Lotus. Similar thing in books. They also have like UTA representation. So, the studios and the streamers can look right to, this company who's like building this content and seeing what's working and then option it into books and movies. So this is like the kind of company I die for. It's not exactly like consumer, but it's like a huge women-powered economy that nobody has thought to build brand and really capitalize on.
That it's fascinating. I love that. And that's so yeah, it's so interesting. It's like to your point, it's already happening. It's not like you're reinventing a new industry. Like this is already a massive industry. It's just building the brand around it. And then creating the business model
And the
around that
flight,
brand with
yeah.
product placement, with
Merch.
continuing.
Yeah, yeah, events, it's like there's, like BravoCon, like there's no romantic fiction version of BravoCon and yet or like Comic-Con, but yet the market's showing that the readers are just as obsessed. So fandom, romantic fiction, like that's my wheelhouse. I love it. And also like we had an investor call with the founders. It was middle of August. So I was like, I don't think we can do an IRL event. So we just did a virtual one. We had like 90 people show up. My allocation was oversubscribed in 24 hours because my people just got it. Like they are the customer. They just got it instantly. They were like, yeah, 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 I'm in. And it was just like it's amazing when that happens. So that's a good example of like matchmaking to what my network cares about and like problems that they could like to see off the bat. But I'll try to describe it to a different kind of investor, and they're like, "What? Romantic fiction? That's cute, Cal. You just wait."
Yeah. No, like, I'm just thinking about the advertising opportunities there, especially if they're reading a book a week and it's like high turnover and you're, yeah, like doing product placement, you can do partnerships with different brands and you're reaching these, and it's, yeah, it's much more immersive. It's doesn't feel as intrusive as, ads in some other platforms. Like, yeah, this could be really, that's super interesting.
Yeah.
Do people consume a lot of that in physical form, or is it still on, like, is it also on Kindles, or where do people read?
Yeah, it's on Kindles, but interestingly enough, you can wherever books are sold, but interestingly enough, they sell 40% of their books direct to consumer, so, like, from their website, which is really
Wow.
interesting to me. So it shows you, like, the power of, like, brand already in this market. People are going directly to the website to be like, "What's next?"
No, I love that. I think it's, yeah, I'm just severely, like, interested in the media side of consumer and how those 2 work together, and if you can figure that out, it's a massive, massive game changer.
Massive, yes. Then other than that, we look at all kinds of stuff. We look at, some beauty brands. There's lots of M&A activity in beauty, and my investor base gets beauty. We just did. I'm like, what other portfolio companies are like Alice Mushrooms? You know Alice
I
Mushrooms?
do not. What is that?
Oh, we must get you some functional mushroom chocolates. They have 3 SKUs, one for like a focus and energy called Brainstorm, which I'm obsessed. It's like, I don't have to take those Adderalls anymore now that I'm not cranking so hard, but the Alice chocolates definitely help. They have one for sleep and they have one for sex. All of them are like highly effective and delicious. They're crushing it. We came into their Series A2. We have Vareo, which is a fragrance brand, like backed in neuroscience, Brightland olive oil, Hey Jane, which is I'm very proud of this portfolio company. It's abortion care via telemedicine. So, across the country, you can go on the Hey Jane platform, you can get mifepristone and abortion pills sent directly to your home, and then also get both clinical care and emotional support via the app and via the platform. Reproductive rights is a very important issue to me and also to my network, to my investor network. So I'm really impressed with what this founder has built in like an incredibly intense political landscape, regulatory landscape. You have to go to market state by state. Every single state regulation is different. It's like it's a bear of a company. Like the moat is gigantic because I don't know who else would ever want to build it, but she has, and they do incredible.
Wow, that's amazing.
By the way, with like big revenue numbers, but yet tricky one to sell to venture. You can imagine investing in abortion care was pretty tricky, but like the women held that deal together for sure.
Yeah, no, it is, yeah, like, it's to your point, like, there's a lot of, when you think about the moat, any of these heavily regulated industries, and especially one that's changing so quickly, if you figure it out, then you have a massive moat around the business, and the other side of it too, from a valuation standpoint, if it's something that a bunch of people don't wanna touch, then that means probably they're probably getting it at a better price point than if it was more effectively, yeah, like, more competitive, so, yeah, it's super interesting.
Exactly.
So if people wanna learn more about your network, about the companies that you're investing in, how can people find out about what you're doing?
Yeah, my website, goldenhourventure.co. My joke is like I'll buy the .com when I have my first exit. Goldenhourventures.co. You can become a member of our syndicate that way. We're on Instagram, Golden Hour Ventures. I have a newsletter, Golden Hour The Flow, that has some deal flow and just some like musings about consumer and what's going on. But yeah, that's where you can find me. Find me on LinkedIn too, but don't DM me, I'll never answer it.
All right, love it. Well, Kelly, this was amazing. It was great to hear your story and the awesome work you're doing through your investing now. So, thank you so much for joining me today.
I appreciate you so much. Thank you.
Thanks.